Hello, I'm Roger Bisbee from Skill Builder. I'm out for a little walk and I'm going to take you with me and show you a few things which I hope you'll find interesting. Now, years ago when people built a wall like this, they just built it all in one continuous go. But now what we do is we put in movement joints, and those movement joints allow a little bit of expansion and contraction. They've got wall ties going through between the two, but they're what they call slip ties, which allow just that bit of movement, and that way hopefully the wall doesn't crack. Now here's a big old job. This house has been roughly doubled in size, and of course having a tin lid on top of it means that they can work all the way through the winter. Now this house belongs to a friend of mine, and it is a kit form house. It's a Scandia house, timber framed, brick clad and tile hung. The guy that built it is not a builder. He decided to build this house in his garden, did a superb job, got in the trades obviously, but managed the whole project himself. Did a fair bit of the practical work as well. Just shows what you can do. And then of course he flogged his original house, so now he lives in the garden. Now this is fairly typical of what's going on all over the country, I guess, is that people are taking houses and transforming them, extending them, putting in a bit of K-ren, putting in some different windows, often anthracite. This is a bit different actually. Here's one that's fairly typical with the anthracite windows, bit of K-ren, just changed the house completely. I've got a feeling that all this stuff is going to date in about another 10 years time. Everybody's going to be ripping out those windows, changing the facades, getting rid of the timber cladding. I've seen it happen so often over the years, even back to stone cladding. I think it'll happen again, but it's all good work for builders. I love walls like this, loads of detail, all the nap flints and all the dental brickwork. You look at the length of that wall. That was when people had a bit of money and labour was cheap. Now this wonderful looking structure is a clove hitch, I believe. The head office of Redland Bricks before they sold it and Eshaw moved in. I was disappointed when I found out that it's actually just a bit of concrete and they've just stuck the bricks over it. There's a little bit of cladding going on there. The old parapets, this is the castle grounds we're in now. Some of this graffiti, these people have carved their names obviously. It's a bit of vandalism really, isn't it? Been there so long and some of it's so fine. It's part of history. It's stuff we find in caves years ago. It tells a story, I guess. And obviously the big bit of stone there sitting on top of the wall, and if they ever fell off down there they would give somebody a serious headache. What they've done with every single one of these, that they've drilled it, put an iron spike down, goes right down through, built into the brickwork probably. In the top they just put a bit of molten lead, just seals it off, stops it rusting, and they're as solid as anything. You don't have to come up and check those every few years. This is a very impressive looking brick wall here, isn't it? If you imagine that just sloping back, because there's a lot of ground being retained by that wall, a bit like a railway embankment. And this was a tunnel, this was the main road going through the town. They used to use this, believe it or not, two-way traffic, lorries going through and everything. They've since taken them around the outside a bit. The tunnel is interesting because in that little entrance down there that you can see with the grey door, the white brickwork, that is one of the old entrances to the caves. And that pub has actually got a cavern in the back of it where they store the beer. But at one time they used to have live music on in there. You used to be able to go in there, they'd have a band playing on a Saturday night, a bit like Chislehurst Caves when they used to have all the bands on at Chislehurst Caves. It was a major venue at one time. Here is peace forever new, when who watch them and away, still all the things in this glade go through the changes of their quiet day. Talking about all the nature basically that's constantly moving through quietly, unseen almost. The birds, the squirrels, the foxes, everything. A lovely old entrance here, moving down. I mean, this is hundreds, this is what, 500 years old, and the old stones going down. We just poke through there a little bit. It's a bit impractical in terms of getting your furniture in and out. You've got to be pretty fit to come up, but I suppose no worse than a lot of places like Clovelly. There's a lot of steps here. This is a local stone. It's called Reigate Stone, but it's just a sandstone basically. It goes down under the whole of London, I believe, comes up this end. It's not a great building stone. It gets, as you can see, eroded fairly quickly. I mean, that's probably 300-400 years old. When I say fairly quickly, they've obviously built the brickwork on top of it there. And the brickwork in some ways is not faring any better. You always get people talking about this going, oh yeah, that's lime mortar, that should never be repointed with sand and cement. That's why those bricks have started started spalling? Well, quite honestly, bricks spall. It's not all about what they do in the way of pointing. This wall has not really been touched. It's got sand and lime in it, and it really is just old age, basically. You can see they've replaced a bit of brickwork up there, and they've put sand and cement pointing in there, and it's not spalling, hasn't done any great harm. But look up here, look above it, look at all that moss. Brick is such a fantastic building material, except these ones, which are bloody horrible. Flittons, we call them, LBC, horrible, horrible hard brick. You can see what happens to them. They're probably no more than 50 years old. They're knackered. They're just not a great brick for building walls with. These are the tank stops, dotted all the way around these castle grounds. Obviously, if we were going to be invaded, they would have been very useful with the tanks, and they would have had a defensive position up here. It would have been the scene of a battle, as it may well have been the scene of a battle hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So we've got a few cracks in the render, which happens. People think that the way to avoid cracking render is to have a really strong sand and cement mix. So they've got an old building here, which was built with sand and lime, and then they've stuck this very, very hard render on it, and of course the building's continuing to move. The only thing that can happen is the render cracks. There's no tensile strength in it, that's the point. It's got a good bit of crush resistance, but no tensile strength. So here, this building is over 500 years old. It's in a place called Slipshoe Street, and it was accommodation for people that were walking the Pilgrim's Way above on the hills up there, and they walked through and they came down into Reigate to have a night's rest on their way. They were going to Canterbury, obviously. This was their hostelry. This was the place they stayed, and this is now my dentist's. I used to do a lot of work in this house back in the day, and it was actually the home of Cliff Michelmore and Jean Metcalfe. Now, you have to be old, you have to go back a bit to remember them, but Cliff Michelmore was probably one of the most famous people in the country. He hosted a programme Tonight with Cliff Michelmore, and his wife Jean Metcalfe, she used to host Women's Hour. So the two of them, between them, were just Mr. and Mrs. not showbiz, but news anyway. So I used to do quite a bit of work for them, and really nice people and beautiful old house. I don't know about you, but I find that kind of house very, very pleasing. Sort of typical Georgian structure. Everything's symmetrical. Until, of course, you go and build an extension on the side of it. And it's been done very tastefully, that. They've actually worked hard to try and match the bricks up. Sometimes you just can't get an exact match for bricks, obviously. You just have to do your best and be honest about it. And what I really like about this, the way that they've just set that back minutely so that they get over that join. Because if you look there, there's the mismatch. There's the difference between the newer brick and the old brick. I think this probably was done before metric brick, so we're still talking about imperial bricks here, but you can see that it would have been hard for them to tooth that out. Butting it up to the side and just having that little return is a perfect way of doing it. And this used to be a pub where I spent rather too much time at one time, like everybody when you're young, and that's what you did, wasn't it? And in actual fact, once I met my wife there, but she was in there, she had a house around the corner, and everybody used to roll out of the pub at closing time and go back to her house to continue the party. There were a few people that I know that carried on drinking in that pub right up until the time when it closed down, and they kind of almost chiseled them out of there and turned it into flats. Nice flats, but it was a better pub. So where do I drink now? Well, I don't, and that's probably why so many pubs are closed. I'm almost teetotal now.